My name is Madylin Hernandez from Oklahoma State University, and today I'm talking to Lindi Thompson, and it is March 3rd, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about her experience with Oklahoma Humanities. So to start off, you want to talk about the role you played with it or with the organization?
Sure. So I have, in 2012, I joined the staff at the Cherokee Heritage Center, which is in Park Hill, Oklahoma, just a little tiny community just outside of Tahlequah. And so I joined the staff there in January of 2012 and started my career in grant writing at the Cherokee Heritage Center. And actually, one of the first grants that I wrote for a nonprofit that was awarded was the Oklahoma Humanities. I think it was the Spring Cycle Award. So it was very exciting that the first grant I ever had that kicked off my grant writing career came from the Oklahoma Humanities Council.
That is amazing.
It's really exciting. Yeah.
So that's your career now, is grant writing?
Yeah. So now I write grants for nonprofit organizations, and I also teach grant writing to new nonprofits, small nonprofits, with anywhere from, we're a 100% volunteer organization up to, we have about, a dozen to 2 dozen employees and a, fairly small budget compared to some of our mega nonprofits and things like that. So I help sort of the smaller end of those, that category of nonprofits do great work in the world. And a lot of what I am blessed to be able to do actually sort of stems out of the humanities field. So, if people are trying to do great work that really gets folks thinking, they're making an impact in their communities. And I think that all stems out of humanities. So that's how, I think in many ways, my experiences working with Oklahoma Humanities kind of shaped how, the stuff that I love to do and the stuff that we do most effectively.
That's amazing. That's so cool. Especially because I know that grant writing can be kind of intimidating, and then you've kind of made a career out of it.
A lot of folks think it's really intimidating. I don't, it's something that, and maybe this is part of it is because Oklahoma Humanities team, the staff there was so awesome that I never, sure, there were things to learn, but I was never intimidated by it in the sense that, oh my gosh, I can't do this, or they're unapproachable. And so I think that working at the Heritage Center in this really wonderful environment to begin with, and our partners that we had through things like, Oklahoma Humanities. Back then it was OHC, and they've rebranded to Oklahoma Humanities. So, but just having a really great support team to always talk to and ask questions and answer questions, it just made the whole process of learning how to become a good and effective grant writer very easy.
Yes, that's awesome. I think I didn't realize how involved I almost said the wrong acronym, but Oklahoma Humanities is with, because I knew it was involved with the community, but I didn't realize it was involved with the Cherokee Center that you're speaking of, and it's interesting.
Yeah.
So for that, so you worked on site?
So I worked at the Cherokee Heritage Center in Park Hill, just outside of Tahlequah. And so do you want me to tell you a little bit about the Heritage Center?
Yeah, for sure. Whatever you want to talk about, let's.
Okay, sure. Cool. If I start going into a different direction, you don't just steer me back. So it's totally fine. So the Cherokee Heritage Center is a nonprofit museum with the mission to preserve, promote, and teach Cherokee history and culture. And I think they were established in the late 60s. The Cherokee National Historical Society was established in the late 60s. And over the course of time, they were able to build the what is now the museum. And the museum sits on the grounds of the former female Cherokee seminary. So the Cherokee Female Seminary was the first educational institution established for specifically women west of the Mississippi. So it's very historical and very cool. In the late 1800s, and I apologize, I don't have that year exactly. In the late 1800s, there was a fire that burnt down most of the seminary, which is really unfortunate. However, there are 3 pillars that still remain from the original location, like from the original structure. And if you go to the Heritage Center, they're outdoors, and we've kind of built like it's really neat. Like you can see the original pillars that are still there, and then there's the museum behind it. So that's really cool. And so the Heritage Center, they host 2 art shows each year, and the Trail of Tears art show, and then the Cherokee Homecoming art show. So that is just for Cherokees. Eastern Band, Katua, and Cherokee Nation citizens can enter their art in there. TOTAS, the Trail of Tears art show, or what we call TOTAS for short. That's anyone who's registered with a Native American, a federally recognized Native American tribe can enter into that. So those are 2 art shows that we do. We also have a permanent exhibit called it's the Trail of Tears exhibit. So that's an indoor permanent exhibit that we have. And then we have 3 other rotating exhibits throughout the year. So those will change depending on whatever the programming committee sets forth for the year. And so like some of the really cool exhibits that they've done and that Oklahoma Humanities has supported is like a couple of years ago, I think we did this one right in the middle of, we started it and then the pandemic hit, and so we had to take it all virtual, but it was still a really cool exhibit. And it was about the Major League Baseball, like Indians in Major League Baseball, like the first 40 years.
That's so interesting.
Super cool.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing about it is that we were able to partner with, through this project, there was a gentleman who's a pretty influential and important member of the Cherokee community. His name's Rob Doherty, and he had this personal collection of all this really cool baseball memorabilia, Cherokee and Pan-Indian baseball collection, and like bats, jerseys, cards, like all that stuff. So we were able to highlight a lot of his stuff and borrow from other collections. So that project, that exhibit, allowed us to and really fostered additional community collaborations. So that's like another one of the great things that we get from the partnership with Oklahoma Humanities, is like really integrating into the community in order to bring our programming to a wide variety of people.
For sure. That's so interesting. And especially because there's like that personal touch to it, like a member of the tribe. And
yeah,
that's amazing.
It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, it is. I love museums, and that's kind of what I want to pursue. So I'm like super interested in hearing that. So you still work pretty closely with Oklahoma Humanities.
Yes, I do. So I worked at the Cherokee Heritage Center. I was on site from 2012 to 2014. In 2014, I decided to, my home is actually in Indiana, East Central Indiana. So I moved home in part because I wanted to go to grad school, and I'm decided at the same time, this is like getting personal, it's totally fine if you put this in there, but my family, my dad and stepmom were having, they're having a baby. And so that summer, they're like, hey, we're having a baby. So when it came down to which school do I want to go to, I really wanted to be close to my family and be a part of who would become my little brother. He turned 6 this month. So I wanted to be a part of his life. So I decided to go to grad school back home so I could be closer to him. And yet I was able to continue working remotely and writing grants for the Heritage Center. So I did that for about 2 years, and then was finishing my master's degree and just decided to take a break from that so I could focus on finishing my thesis and all that. And then last year during the pandemic, I was able to renew the contract with the Heritage Center. So for a little less than a year now, more like 6 months, I've started working with the Heritage Center as their primary grant writer again. So there was like a 4 or 5 year break in between there where I didn't work with them, but still, I had lots of friends at the Heritage Center, so I still kind of knew what was going on.
Yeah, you stayed hip to what was going on for sure.
That's the first time anybody's ever called me hip, so thank you.
Oh, no worries. With that, it kind of makes me want to ask about how did you, and you're from Indiana, how did you end up in Oklahoma? Did you like go to undergrad here?
No, that's a really interesting question. So I actually, my bachelor's degree was from a small liberal arts school in southwestern Indiana, called DePaul University, DePaul with a W, not the one in Chicago with an L. And I studied anthropology and sort of specialized in Native American studies there. So when I was growing up, my grandmother she was an anthropologist, archaeologist, and she was all but dissertation. She got very sick later in life, and so she was a non-traditional student. So she went to college at like her 50s, and like went straight through the dissertation, like, or the PhD program. And her focus was in archaeology of like deep Indiana history, so like deep Native American history in Indiana. And so growing up in Indiana, I had an unusual exposure to Native American culture that I think a lot of just white kids growing up in Indiana wouldn't have received because of what my grandmother did.
Yeah.
And that sort of, I think in many ways, like helped to shape the way that helped to shape my understanding of culture and historic processes and all of those kinds of things. So like even like a little, like 3 and 4 years old, I was, going to events where there were different Native American cultures being represented. And so I think that like I said, gave me an exposure to something that I hadn't always had. When I was in college, it was just like a series of fortunate events that unfolded, and I was able to really dive into Native American cultural studies because of the people that I had around me, like the professors that's what they specialized in. And when I was in one semester, I did an off-campus program in New Mexico, where I worked at Chizuki Pueblo as, it was like kind of an internship kind of thing. And again, was exposed to a culture in the United States that many people don't recognize, or, it's not something, like our general lens is that like all the Native Americans are gone, and that is just such a false narrative. And so I spent time in New Mexico, and then right after college I went to Alaska and nannied for a family who they were the grandparents raising Native American children. And so again, just kind of like throughout my life had these experiences where I was able to interact with First Nations people who were here before European settlers, and that was really, and they were very incredible experiences all on their own. And so in 2000, so this was after, so I graduated college in 2010, went up to Alaska for a summer, did that, came back, and one of the other passions that I have is for political campaigns. So whether it's like ballot initiatives or candidate campaigns, I love doing it. So, and I've always done that. So sort of like these two passions that I had, politics and Native American studies, came together in this opportunity to work for then tribal councilman Bill John Baker's campaign for chief of Cherokee Nation. And so this was 2011, and I saw that they were hiring for volunteer coordinators. So that's a position that I had had before, and a position that I knew how to do. And though I was not Cherokee, and of course, they really promoted Cherokee first hiring practices, and I 100% support that, they weren't able to fill that position with someone in Cherokee Nation. So I moved from my home in Indiana to Northeast Oklahoma in Tahlequah, where I worked as the volunteer coordinator for our candidate. And he won, and that's really great. And so I had access to resources that that I otherwise wouldn't have had. So I came down to work on a campaign. We won, and I really loved living in Northeast Oklahoma. I know, nobody,
Yeah.
a lot of folks don't say that, but there's really something special that happens with community here. And I think what I was doing on the campaign, where I was working directly with a lot of community leaders, really like blended well with what I just love to do. And it also blended well with what was going on at the Heritage Center. So I was able to, they needed a grant writer. Their grant writer had stepped down about a year before. And so it just was a really good fit. And so I had done grant writing in college, and have, like I said, worked in, other community organizing kind of institutions. And so started working at the Heritage Center, and that has just like opened the door for the path that has become my life over the past 10 years. I can't believe it's like my 10-year anniversary with Oklahoma right now.
That's amazing. And so you currently live in Tahlequah, or
Yep. So it's a great question. So my home base is still in Indiana. So it's really, I am so blessed in so many ways in life. But I live in what was my grandfather's home in Indiana, which is right across the street from the house I grew up in, which is where my dad and stepmom and little brother live. So I grew up right across the street from my grandfather. He passed away in 2015, and my husband and I have lived in his house since he passed away. So we bought his house, so that's our home now. So I'm very close with my family. My older brother is just about 10 or 15 minutes away that way. My mom's about 20 minutes away that way. So it's like, that's my home base. But when we're not in the middle of a global pandemic, I am still coming. I still spend about a third of my time in Oklahoma. So 1 week a month I'm here, or even more frequently sometimes of the year, like when there's just more things going on. So that's my career. So I do, I still, again, work with the Heritage Center to do grant writing for them. There are also other Cherokee organizations that I do grant writing kind of work with. And I'm just so blessed that this is my life. Like, I love doing this kind of stuff, and I make a living out of doing it. So it's just really wonderful.
That is amazing. When you were talking about your grandmother, it made me, I was thinking about, you have been exposed to so many different cultures within the umbrella of Native American cultures.
Sure.
And comparing, because I grew up here in Oklahoma, so like comparing, because Native American people are everywhere. Like, I grew up, not everywhere, but like I grew up around them and was aware of their culture and things like that. So hearing you talk about being in Indiana and like people not knowing about that, I find that very interesting. I don't
It's really like, so I can talk about this a little bit more because it's endlessly fascinating to me too, because Indiana, like if you break down the name of the state, is Indian, right? That like it was named after because there were Native people in Indiana, and of course they were called Indians, and it was a misnomer and all that. We know this now.
Yes.
And so, but okay, so in college, so as an undergrad, this is a semester like independent study project that I worked on. It was so fascinating because Anderson, the city that I grew up in, is called Anderson, and it is it's like, do a really brief history of it. In the early 1800s, excuse me. Gosh, okay, sorry. I'm like, where do I start? Of course, there were always Native people here. I'm sorry, in Anderson. I'm currently sitting in Tahlequah area. I'm currently in Oklahoma. So, so back home in Indiana, obviously there were Native people there. There's a major river that runs through the current day Anderson, Indiana. And of course, people settled near major waterways. And so there was always, Native American people there. By the time European settlers were, making their way west into Indiana, there had already been some displacement happening. So one of the tribes that was in like the Indiana area, central Indiana area at the time of European settlers coming in was Delaware tribe. So they had already been pushed east, from the east to, current day Indiana.
Mhm.
And so like the town I grew up in was Madison, or I'm sorry, the county I grew up in is Madison, but right next to it is Delaware County. So you see these like, and just from reading history, like where did the name Delaware come from? Well, it came from Delaware Indians who were from the east.
Yeah.
And we have these like little, what I called like palimpsests of the past. So these little relics of the past of Native American culture in central Indiana that in many ways is unrecognized, but we still use it in kind of really terrible misappropriative ways.
Yeah.
And so one of those things, like Anderson, again, the city that I grew up in, the big city, had the name Anderson comes from Chief Anderson and of I think the Miami tribe. And but of course Anderson is like a very like European name. And so like how do we reconcile, like in our public understanding, how do we reconcile these relics of the past that we misuse that have also gained meaning in our current day lives? So a very clear example of this, so we've got Anderson, Indiana, and I would say that most people don't really know, like most Andersonians don't really know where the name Anderson came from. Yet we had Indiana like kind of synonymous with basketball. And so or it used to be, maybe not so much anymore, but Anderson High School was one of the biggest one of the biggest and best teams in the state back in like the 60s and 70s. So they had this incredible gym that was like, I think Newcastle High School, which is maybe 35 minutes away from Anderson, had was 1 or 2 seats bigger, their basketball gymnasium, than Anderson High Schools. And that gym, Anderson High School gym, was called the Wigwam because they were the Anderson Indians. But again, super misappropriation.
Yes.
They weren't having those conversations back in the 30s, 40s, 50s when they established that.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the Wigwam has become synonymous with Anderson, Indiana. It has become synonymous with like a lot of when things would happen in Anderson, like a presidential campaign was coming to Indiana, they would come to the Wigwam. Other like the Harlem Globetrotters played at the Wigwam. Like, is an important piece of Anderson history. But and we have like there's that, and then we have Mound State Park is in Anderson, so the mound builders, and there's like all of this really rich history about what happened in Indiana, like in the early 20th century, so like early 1900s. There, like I think before the Depression, so somewhere between like 1910 and like 1930, they actually had like, it's insane when if you look at this stuff, they had like children's rides that were built on top of these like sacred mounds. Yeah, like it blows your mind when you go back and start looking at the historical record of these things. And this is a piece of Indiana history that most people just are not aware of. So what do we do? Like how do we reconcile these things? So that was one of the things I was always really fascinated with. Growing up like I did, with my grandmother being in anthropology and talking about these things. I remember having these conversations like at a very young age. And so it's fascinating because then I move out here to Oklahoma, and like you said, like even if you're not Native and you grow up here, you have this concept that like it exists all around you because we're in Cherokee Nation, perhaps where you are, it's like Chickasaw Nation, like it exists and it's just part of your like just your world. And like if I drive down to downtown Tahlequah, the street signs are, there's the English language, and then they're written in Cherokee syllabary as well. Like, which is such a cool,
I was like, Tahlequah is so sacred for that very reason. But even in Indiana, you're engulfed in this culture, like it's the Wigwam, and people are still ignorant to it, and that's just kind of mind-boggling. And so that's what you're tackling in this project. You're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I was just like exploring it because I don't think anybody had really explored it. Of course, I was an undergrad, and had like a lot more, like, gosh, that was like 12 or 13 years ago when I wrote that paper, and I've learned a ton since then, and I would go back and reframe it. But it's just, what it did allow me to do was, when I finally did come out to Oklahoma, like, give me at least some sort of frame of reference for, like, this is what happens when, there are no federally recognized tribes in Indiana. And so, like, this is what happens when the representation is not given to people.
Yeah.
It is withheld, and misinformation is circulated. And of course, 13 years ago, we weren't talking about things in quite the same way that we are now. But it is fascinating. Like, it would be interesting just to do like a major study on, like, how does, growing up in Indiana, where you see all these little things about Native American culture, but it's completely absent from current day practice. Like, you don't see, they're just like, are Native American events happening now in Indiana, where here it's still very much alive. And so how do you kind of, like, what does that do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and very thought-provoking. And it's almost makes me grateful for organizations like Oklahoma Humanities, who go and support these things. So it is a part of our culture, and our
Absolutely.
children do learn about it, and there's opportunities.
Yeah, and that's why the kind of work that Oklahoma Humanities is doing is so important, because that's the kind of conversation, like, there are conversations that can take place around these things. And so Oklahoma Humanities, I think, has been not only instrumental in just granting funds across the state to have these conversations, but really being a beacon and a driver behind the kind of conversations that are happening. And that's incredibly powerful, and incredibly important to have in our modern day conversations as well.
For sure. And knowing that they've been around, like, this project is for their 50th anniversary.
Cool.
And
That's
they've been like a catalyst for these conversations almost for 50 years now. That's kind of insane and super cool to me.
Yeah. And I think it'd be really fascinating to see what the like, to take what's the word I'm looking for, to take some sort of like inventory, maybe that is happening with this project, and see how the conversations have changed over the past 50 years. Like, how have we moved the needle?
On our list of interviewees, we have some like people who were governors and things, like, not governors, but who were representatives for the state, who signed in the initiative that started funding the program and things like that. So like, from the very beginning, and I'm interested to see what they have to say in contrast to, like, yeah, like you said, it's so interesting. But I find your perspective especially interesting because it affected your career.
It absolutely did. This has been, I'm so I'm so blessed. I don't know what I did in a past life, if anything, to deserve all that I get to do now. But I do hold what I do as without, I don't want it to sound too goofy, but like, what I do is important and sacred work. And I approach my work that way, going, what, this isn't just like a paycheck. This is important, really important work that we're doing, and changing the conversation, bringing, giving voice to, prioritizing, Native American voices in every conversation that we have, making sure that there's a seat at the table. That, like, that's important work. Yes. And Oklahoma Humanities has certainly, I think, championed that from day one. They've always just been a step or two ahead, a cut above, just a little bit avant-garde for the program, for what's happening. And that's so cool.
It is. That's amazing. And back to your work writing grants, it has to be more rewarding. And to me, it has to be more rewarding knowing that you're, like, working for a cause. Because you said it's not like a 9 to 5, it's not a paycheck. Like, just because everyone talks about when you love your job, you never work a day in your life. And I feel
Right.
like you truly embody that. And
Oh, thank you.
you're so passionate, and I've enjoyed talking to you so much. That's why I'm very
Of
fascinated.
course. Yeah, I like, that is true, like to a degree, like if you, I'm just telling you this because I think you're, maybe early in your career, like
Yeah.
I am blessed. And when there are certainly days where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this, or like I've got 6 deadlines and I'm chasing them all. But, at the same time, like, uh, it is really, I think about it every day and try to be very grateful for it because, a little white girl and this is sort of off the record, but like a little white girl from Indiana getting to do this incredible work in a way that is supportive, and meaning I have support from a lot of wonderful people and in turn support their work. That to me, like, that's the ultimate, when I die, like I will know that I have done work with like the highest intention, like in the highest, like
Yeah.
for what I know, like it's been good work. And I really do enjoy it. Gosh, it's so cool. Like it just, and as I was thinking about this, Madylin, as I was like getting ready for this, I was reflecting, like, what is she going to ask me? What do I need to be thinking about? But really just have been thinking about how incredibly blessed I am that I get to do this. And like, it takes hard work, but it also takes a little bit of dumb luck. And I've gotten both of those. So
Perfect.
yeah, thanks.
No, it's amazing. And like you said, I am early in my career, and I'm still an undergrad actually, but
Oh, okay.
yes,
I thought you were a grad student. Sorry.
and just because the field of history is so broad, or anthropology, there's like so many routes, and like hearing your perspective, it just opens different ways students can think, because you never ever really think about the opportunities
Right.
because they're so
What
vast.
what year are you in your program?
I
And
am
what is your program? Tell me a little bit about that.
yes, I'm a history major
Okay.
with a minor in gender and women's studies.
Oh, cool.
Yes, with a focus on women's history, specifically Hispanic women.
That's awesome.
Yes.
I
Oh, sorry. No, you
no,
can't.
my second major was women's studies, so I love that. I'm like, cool. That's
And
great.
it's kind of crazy how much the program as a whole, not just at Oklahoma State, has grown. Like gender and women's studies, it's what we study now, from what I understood, is like in like I can't even think of the word, just exponentially different than a couple of years ago.
I'm sure
It's progressing so
the
quickly.
yeah, it is. And I like one of the chair of the department back at DePaul. She I follow her on Facebook, and she's one of those professors that like posts a lot of like stuff related to what's happening on campus. And I can even see how like I said, I graduated in 2010, so like 11 years ago. It's like really not that long ago, but how the conversation has shifted, it's so powerful. And I'm going to tell you this, Madylin, you can put this, whether this fits into the oral history program or not, or like this, what we're doing right now. One thing, if you, what year are you again? I'm sorry, did you say?
Oh, I'm a second semester junior.
Okay. As next year, you'll be a senior, you start going into like thinking about going into the workforce, and you're going to have all these critics that are like, why did you study liberal arts for like gender studies? What's it going to do? Well, let me tell you this, okay? What you are learning is getting your brain ready for critical thinking, and critical thinking skills and the ability to write are going to put you leaps and bounds ahead of the competition. And what you may or may not end up in a job that is at all related to what you got your degree in, but what is going to impress employers and those around you who can help you spark your career into what you do want to do. What's going to put you ahead is your ability to think critically about an issue and come up with solutions. And that is what liberal arts education teaches you, that I don't think people who just go to a business school or go to something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say pragmatic because I don't feel like that's the right word, but something that's like, oh, here's a path, you're in pre-med, now you go here, now you go to, and then you go to med school, and then, they lack a lot of times. And I mean, these people are my friends. Like, I went to college with them, and now I see them in their careers. Like, they lack a certain degree of ability to think through, okay, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, here's how we're going to get there. And that's what a liberal arts degree is going to do. And that's what learning gender studies and history is going to help you to understand, is like, this is how we approach an issue, this is how we fix it, this is how we change the world. And so screw those people who are going to tell you like, oh, you should have gotten a degree in something more practical. No, you're going to be successful doing exactly who you are.
It's actually kind of hysterical to me because I was originally a business major, entrepreneurship marketing, and I was sitting there my second semester freshman year, and I said, I'm not becoming a better person from this. I'm not expanding my mind. And I was like, you know what? History's always fascinated me. And then I took a gender and women's studies class, and I said, this is what I want to study. This is interesting to me. And here I am doing oral histories, which
so cool.
It's crazy how it works, but we're kind of got off track.
No, that's okay. No, it's fine. Like, I'm good. I love talking. I love talking with people who are at this stage in their life. I have a nephew who's 17. He's just a junior in high school, so he's younger than you still, but he's like thinking about these things, he's getting ready to college, what do I want to do? And so we've been having a lot of these conversations, and it's just, I'm so excited. And, I think your generation gets like a really bad rap, but every time I talk to a person you're in your like age category, I feel totally confident that the future is bright and wonderful, because we have people like you who are critically thinking about the things that need to change in this world. You are the leaders for the future, and I have every confidence that we're going to be okay when there's people like you who are in charge, like who are doing great things in the world. We're going to be not okay. We're going to thrive. This is the future is bright because of people like you. So yes. I'm so glad that you changed. I have a very I remember, because I went in thinking I was going to do political science and economics. Those were going to be my double major. And I got my worst grade in college in my intro to political science class. It was like a B-. And I was like, what? I got a B- in political science, but I did. And then I dropped out of my economics 101 class because I was like, this is not making me, this is nasty stuff. And so I'm getting out of capitalism. So I totally understand. And this is what I tell Dylan, my nephew, all the time. I'm like, Dylan, your 4 years of college are for you to explore. They are not like you, when you're 22, when you get out of college, you still don't know what you want to do. And that's okay. And so just take those 4 years of college and that 10 years in your 20s and experience everything. And if I had not experienced everything that came to me, I would not be where I am today. Had I taken a path, a very rote path that was already laid out for me, I would not have this beautiful life that I do today. So just take every opportunity. I'm sorry, I know we're getting off topic here. So.
No, I feel like that this is super important to include, because it does tie back into the Oklahoma Humanities and the power that the humanities hold in our communities.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it exposes people like me and people like your nephew to these things and opens our minds to them and makes us better people for it.
And that's what the world needs. The world needs people thinking about things in new ways. That's how we're going to improve our collective condition. That's how we are going to make the world a better place. That's what our leaders need. The world that our grandparents, and to some degree my parents, lived was these prescribed paths. In Anderson, we where I grew up, I think most of the Midwest, you graduated high school. If you graduated high school, and you went to work in a factory, like that is just the path that you had. And we see what happens when you don't have very expanded what happens when you don't have expanded life views or understandings of the world is that you don't have critical ways to come up with solutions to current problems. And I think that we see that a lot in the leadership that is of a certain generation, because they had these prescribed paths, and things like humanities wasn't something that was discussed widely. And so you end up with like no answers, no solutions, no way to feel like you either have to have the right answer or the wrong answer. And I think what humanities does and liberal arts does is helps you be a little bit more comfortable with like, well, let's try this and see how this would work, and be comfortable with it. Maybe it's not going to be perfect out of the gate, but we've got to keep trying. We've got to keep having these conversations if we want anything to change and improve in our collective experience.
I completely agree. And like I said, I feel like this will all be very relevant to
Cool.
the people talking.
Good.
But to bring it back to Oklahoma Humanities,
Yeah.
is there like anything else you want to add about the organization, and aside from how it has affected you?
Sure, I would love to, just because I think Oklahoma Humanities is like the greatest group of individuals too. And that's something that, when you have like, as a person, as a single individual, you're like, I have this, idea, or I have this passion, and, I want to do something about it. But and that's great, and we all should. But when you get a group of people with the similar goal, like, heading in the same direction, and they're utilizing their talents in the best ways that they can, like the talents that they have sort of as this group, you do this well, you do this well, and we're all heading to the same direction, magical, powerful things happen. And that has always been my experience with the Oklahoma Humanities Council. When I first started, almost 10 years ago, I think a few of the people who are still a part of the staff were there then and are still there now. But there have been some new faces in there, like Caroline Lowry. When I started 10 years ago, Caroline wasn't there, and then she was the program officer. And then I think she took a couple years, she and her husband had a baby, and I think she took a couple years where she wasn't at OH, and then she came back as the executive director. And I remember that the former executive director, Anne, was amazing too. And I think Anne really mentored Caroline in really passionate and exciting ways that made Caroline really excited. And so she comes in as the director, and there's Kelly is in there now. And there's just always, Oklahoma Humanities has had the ability to attract a really great group of people who are committed and dedicated to the purpose of the organization, and they're very passionate about this. So beyond the big scope of what Oklahoma Humanities does and has done for humanities in this state, they also just have wonderful people who are working for them. And at the end of the day, that's what a movement is. A movement is about people, and moving the needle happens because people make it happen. And so Oklahoma Humanities has been just a beacon of driving, the conversation forward. And I'm gonna just say it, in an otherwise really pretty conservative state. They're like, and that's not that you can't be involved in humanities conversations and be considered, because you can. And perhaps that's even more important, that we have those conversations with our conservative brothers and sisters. But it's still like how they've been able to move the needle because of the individuals who are part of the organization it's just incredible. And I look up to them so much, and I have created a repertoire with Caroline. We're good friends, and she's actually introduced me to the Indiana Humanities, her equivalent over there. And so that I just want to say that I just think that the people who are part of the Oklahoma Humanities Council are incredible too. The staff, the board, for making these opportunities possible and available to a wide audience in the state.
Yes, I agree completely. Caroline's the one who's overseeing this project.
She's so cool. Isn't she great?
Yes, she's awesome.
I just love her. I just love her to pieces. So I do. She's great.
Okay. I mean, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap things up?
I mean, do you have any specific questions? Like, are there certain things that you would like me to discuss about humanities, or any specific questions that you have about that? Because like I could go on and on all day, but if there's like any specific things that we want to touch on.
I whatever you want to talk about. This interview really didn't have a
But it was pretty open-ended.
Mhm.
Awesome. I will say this. I think that just a couple other things. One of the times that the first time that I met Anne, and I'm saying that right. It's Anne. Anne was the former executive director. Maybe you don't know because you only know Caroline. That's fine. I'm fairly certain it's Anne, but hopefully I'm not getting that wrong. Uh, Caroline and this is before, when Caroline was the program officer, so she was directly working with the grant side of things, and Anne was the executive director. They had come to Tahlequah all the way from Oklahoma City. And I remember that they rented a car. I think it had something to do with like Anne's car was in the shop, or I don't exactly remember, but they had to rent a car to come to Tahlequah, and they ended up in a Dodge Challenger, with, this super fast like sports car. And I remember them we were waiting for them at the Heritage Center, and I remember them driving up, and I was like, wow, I was not expecting that to be their like Anne's car. You think of this like executive director of this humanity, like I'm a Prius or a Subaru or something, and she comes riding up, and they're like, oh my gosh, this car was insane. I can't believe. So it was just, they're very real, approachable people. Like we had, for whatever reason, they had to rent this car, and they were both just like, oh my gosh, this car is ridiculous. Like, why do we have this sports car? But it was so neat because the Oklahoma Humanities Council had supported, continuously supporting our exhibits and our programs. But one of the things that we have at the Heritage Center is this outdoor living history exhibit, Tahlequah. So Tahlequah is modeled after a early 18th century east town in the east. So before Cherokees were moved to current day Oklahoma. It's modeled after a Eastern Woodlands village that existed in the early 18th century at the dawn of contact with European settlers. So that's sort of like the period of time. And we have tour guides. So every hour on the half hour, there are 6 tours a day. And so they came for the tour, and it was just really cool because it to me, it demonstrated that, Oklahoma Humanities is like, sure, they want to give away their money, but they really care about the message that's coming from the grants that they distribute throughout the state. And so they, she came, and both of them came. They did the exhibit. They looked through the exhibit that they had supported. So we had one of our rotating exhibits was there, and they got an opportunity to look at that. And and then they made like, they were not like heavy-handed about it at all, but they asked these incredible questions that helped me to think about ways to improve the programs and exhibits, but in a very kind and generous and loving way. So it was just, again, incredible. And I know also, so this is not a Heritage Center program, but it happens here in Tahlequah as well. And so I do want to just talk about it because I know it's very important to the community here. But every year, the NSU, Northeastern State University, is here in Tahlequah, and they have every year symposium. And that is it's like a conference. I think it's like 2 or 3 days, maybe like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday conference on NSU's campus that really highlights a lot of the wonderful things that are happening in the field of Native American studies and Native American movements in Oklahoma and throughout the US. And so you get some really big speakers in there, like folks from the BIA, local like Cherokee Nation officials come, and it's a really incredible thing. And so I think part of why they had come to town that day that they drove the Challenger in here was to attend a symposium, and they stopped by the Heritage Center. And I want to say that I know that that's an incredibly important program at NSU for the wider community. And so again, the programs that they support, the conversations that they encourage are just such an important piece of what's happening in Oklahoma, and I just love it and can't get enough of it. So that's what I'll say about the symposium. We were just talking about that yesterday or last week. I met with one of she's a good friend of mine, but she's also a professor of Native American Studies. I think it's Cherokee Native American Studies at NSU. She was talking about symposium, and it made me think about that because I was like, oh, that's so cool. So
That is awesome. It's so exciting to hear the impact that Oklahoma Humanities has and how that deeply they are involved in the communities around the state.
oh yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool.
I've really enjoyed talking today.
Absolutely.
And do you have anything else to add about Oklahoma Humanities before we?
I don't, but I just, like a standing invitation to you because you're just wonderful and like a bright spot in the world. And I'm so glad that you exist. If there's ever any way that I can help you with like your big dreams, the things that you're doing when internship stuff or, I would love to just, open a conversation with you about like the future. And so if there's anything you ever need, please, my door's open to you.
For sure. I will probably actually take you up on that because
Please do.
in this world, direction's hard and I don't really have a direction right now. And I would love to hear more about your insight and your experiences.
Anything I can ever do to help you because you're obviously very sparkling, radiant young woman. And I want to support the wonderful things that you're going to do in the world.
Thank you so much for today.
Absolutely.
I really appreciated your time and you have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much, Madylin. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.